Ivan the Terrible, born Ivan IV Vasilievich in 1530, the first ruler of Russia to assume the title of Tsar. His reign from 1547 until his death in 1584 is marked by profound transformations in Russian politics, society, and economy, alongside a notorious legacy of cruelty and erratic behavior. Ivan's achievements include the vast expansion of Russian territories and the establishment of a central bureaucracy, which laid foundational structures for the Russian state. However, his rule is equally as infamous for the oprichnina, a policy of state terror against the nobility, and the unfortunate massacre at Novgorod, which are emblematic of his brutal methods of maintaining control. His complex legacy combines visionary leadership and ruthless tyranny, making him a figure of both reverence and horror in the pages of Russian history. Hello and welcome to the channel. If it's your first time here, it's good to meet you, and if you're coming back, great to see you again. As always, those who want to support the channel, you're already doing it. The best way is just to enjoy the content. Those who want to go above and beyond can hit the like and subscribe, or take a look in the video description. You'll find where you need to go. But for now, let's get nice and relaxed, take a nice deep breath, and we may begin our full biography of Ivan the Terrible. Ivan Vasilievich, later known as Ivan the Terrible, was born on the 25th of August, 1530, to Vasily III and his second wife, Elena Glinskaya. His royal lineage included a mix of significant historical figures. His paternal grandmother, Sofia Palaiologina, was a Byzantine princess from the Palaiologos family, which included the final Byzantine emperor Constantine XI. His mother, Elena, came from a diverse background, with her mother being a Serbian princess and her father belonging to the Glinsky clan, which was also associated with the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and they claimed descent from both Orthodox Hungarian nobles and the Mongolian ruler Mamai. Named Ivan in honor of St. John the Baptist, whose commemoration day is close to his birthday, he was occasionally referenced to by the name Titus and Smaragd, reflecting the Rurikid tradition of using multiple names. His baptism was conducted at the Trinity Lavra of St. Sergius by Abbot Joasaph, with significant figures from the religious community as his godparents. But tragedy struck in the early days of his life, when his father died from blood poisoning. Ivan was only 3 years old, leaving him as the Grand Prince, as per his father's very strict wishes. His mother, Elena, initially took on the role of regent, but her untimely death in 1538, granted under suspicious circumstances believed to be poisoning, left Ivan in the care of the feuding boyar families. The power struggles and neglect that he faced during these early years deeply affected him, which he later described in a letter to Andrei Kurbsky, highlighting the harsh upbringing and neglect he and his brother Yuri had experienced. On the 16th of January, 1547, at only 16 years of age rather, Ivan was crowned the Tsar of all Russia in a grand ceremony at the Cathedral of the Dormition in the Moscow Kremlin. This event marked a significant evolution in the Russian monarchy, elevating the title from Grand Prince, which had been used by Moscow's rulers, to Tsar, reflecting his grandfather Ivan III's ambitions to affirm the sovereignty of Moscow over all of Russia. During the coronation, Metropolitan Macarius anointed Ivan and adorned him with the royal regalia, including the cross of the life-giving tree, the barmas, and the famed cap of monarch, symbolizing his new authority. This pivotal moment declared Ivan as the supreme ruler of Russia, with a divine right to rule, echoing the roles of historical Caesars and Khans. In fact, it's suggested that this new title not only solidified his political authority, but also placed him on a kind of divine pedestal, aligning him with the theological concept of God's earthly representative. Thus, Ivan's rule took on a sacred dimension, portraying him as a chosen figure destined to lead his people. Only 2 weeks after his coronation, Ivan further solidified his royal status by marrying Anastasia Romanovna from the influential Romanov family, establishing a dynastic connection that would later see the Romanovs themselves come to prominence. In an effort to place the Russian monarchy on equal footing with the royal houses of Europe, such as the Habsburgs, Ivan and his successors adopted mythologized genealogies. These linked them to ancient Roman lineage and other noble ancestors, thereby enhancing their prestige both domestically and internationally. Now, Ivan IV in particular was keen on promoting his supposed descent from the legendary Rurik, and even a fabricated brother of Emperor Augustus, aiming to underscore his Germanic roots and distinguish his heritage from that of the traditional Rus princes. This maneuver was part of a broader strategy to protect the image of a venerable and historically rooted Russian state on the grand European stage. The early years of his reign were marked by significant administrative reforms and modernization efforts that profoundly changed the structure of Russian governance and society. One of his major reforms was the revision of the law code with the Sudebnik of 1550, streamlining legal processes and laying the groundwork for a more centralized and organized state. Additionally, he established Russia's first standing army, known as the Streltsy, to strengthen his military presence. In a move to enhance the governance structure, Ivan created the Zemsky Sobor, the first Russian parliament, which was an assembly of feudal states. He also formed the Chosen Council, a body of nobles to advise the Tsar. Further bolstering the Church's position, the Council of the 100 Chapters was convened to standardize church regulations and rituals across Russia. These efforts were complemented by the introduction of local self-governance in rural areas, particularly in the northeast. However, Ivan's reign also saw moments of severe health and profound mistrust. In 1553, during a severe illness, Ivan's request for the boyars to pledge loyalty to his infant son was met with hesitation, exacerbating his distrust towards them and leading to a period of violent purges within the highest ranks of the church and nobility. Simultaneously, he embraced technological advancements by establishing the Moscow Print Yard in 1553, which of course brought the first printing press to Russia. This initiative sparked initial resistance and culminated in the arson of the facility, forcing the pioneers of Russian printing, being Ivan Fedorov and Pyotr Myslavets, to flee to Lithuania. Despite these challenges, printing did resume in 1568 under Andronik Timofeyevich Neveja and his son. One of Ivan's most famous architectural commissions was the construction of St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow, commemorating the conquest of Kazan. Contrary to the persistent legend that Ivan blinded the architect Postnik Yakovlev to prevent him from creating anything comparable in beauty, Yakovlev's later works, including contributions to the Kazan Kremlin and other religious edifices, confirm his continued involvement in significant projects. In the latter half of his reign, Ivan faced mounting challenges, including poor harvests, devastation from his Oprichnina policies, which we'll get to, frequent Tatar raids, and ongoing, seemingly never-ending wars. These issues, combined with a growing population, led to a severe socio-economic crisis and set the stage for the eventual institution of serfdom under Tsar Boris Godunov. These laws, initially restricting peasant mobility, laid the groundwork for serfdom's formal establishment in 1597. Well, before we get to all of that, we must say that the 1560s in general were a pretty chaotic decade for Russia, marked by misfortune after misfortune that profoundly impacted both the nation and Ivan personally. While the country grappled with droughts and famines and losses and military setbacks, including wars with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Additionally, they faced a sea-trading blockade that was enforced by the Swedes, the Poles, and the Hanseatic League, further straining the economy. While the personal life of Ivan also suffered during this period. The death of his beloved wife, Anastasia Romanovna, in 1560, suspected to be from poisoning, deeply affected him, exacerbating his distrust towards the nobility. The suspicion intensified when one of his closest advisors, Prince Andrei Kurbsky, defected over to the Lithuanian side, leading attacks against Russian territories. These events likely contributed to Ivan's growing paranoia and his increased erratic behavior. In a dramatic move, on December 3, 1564, Ivan left Moscow for Alexandrova Sloboda, declaring his abdication in 2 letters where he cited the treachery and corruption of not just the aristocracy, but the clergy. While the boyar court, paralyzed in his absence and fearful of potential chaos, sent envoys to plead with Ivan to return. Ivan agreed, but only under the condition that he be granted absolute authority, including the right to execute and confiscate the estates of traitors without interference from the Boyar Council or the Church. Well, upon his return, Ivan established the Oprichnina, a separate territory within Russia over which he had exclusive control, initially encompassing parts of the former Novgorod Republic. This division of the state created two distinct territories, the Oprichnina, controlled directly by Ivan, and the Zemstina, governed by the Boyar Council. Ivan's personal guard, the Oprichniki, was formed and granted significant social and economic privileges. This force, which eventually included notorious figures like Malyuta Skratov and the German adventurer Heinrich von Staden, owed allegiance solely to Ivan. The Oprichniki were instrumental in executing the first wave of persecutions that targeted the Russian nobility, particularly the clans of Suzdal, leading to the execution, exile, and forcible tonsuring of many prominent individuals under very dubious charges of conspiracy. The oppression from the Oprichnina intensified, with the Oprichniki extracting exorbitant taxes from peasants, leading to widespread hardships. A lot of people simply decided to just leave, which of course further decreased agricultural output and caused grain prices for the people left to soar. The later part of Ivan's reign was marked by his remorse over the excesses of the Oprichnina, particularly after the accidental death of his son. Ivan's repentance led him to commission lists of the Christian victims killed by the system, requesting prayers for them from monasteries, reflecting a tortured legacy, combining reform, terror, and ultimately a deep sense of personal guilt. The brutal enforcement of the Oprichnina reached a critical peak with the massacre at Novgorod in 1570, which was instigated by Ivan's unfounded suspicions of treachery within the city. Believing that the noblemen of Novgorod were conspiring to defect to the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, Ivan was swayed by the accusations from a citizen named Peter Volinets, who, though modern historians generally dismiss these claims as baseless. In response, Ivan ordered the Oprichniki to execute a savage raid on the city. Thus, they descended upon Novgorod, wreaking havoc through looting and arson, effectively ensuring that the city would never recover its historical prominence. The extent of the brutality during the massacre is subject to a few varying accounts, with death toll estimates ranging from 2 to 60,000, though the lower figures are more widely acceptable by contemporary researchers given the reduced population of post-famine and also epidemics. The campaign of terror included the execution of many citizens by drowning them in the Volkhov River, and the Archbishop of the city was hunted down and killed. It is reported that up to 600 people were executed every single day during the massacre. While following this dark event, many of the survivors were deported from the devastated city, nowhere to return to and nowhere to go. The Oprichnina itself began to unravel following Ivan's campaign in Novgorod. Its effectiveness and loyalty were seriously questioned during the 1571-72 Russo-Crimean War, where it failed to adequately perform against the Crimean Tatar forces. Recognizing the failure of this institution, Ivan officially abolished it in 1572, and finally disbanded his oprichniki. In a peculiar twist of governance, in late 1575, Ivan appointed Simeon Bekbulatovich, a Tatar prince, as the Grand Prince of all Russia. This appointment, which lasted about a year, appears to have been a strategic act by Ivan to manipulate land holdings and monastic wealth. The English envoy Giles Fletcher the Elder noted that under Simeon's nominal rule, monastic lands were seized on Ivan's orders, though Ivan publicly opposed these acts. Now, back to the early years of Ivan's reign for a moment. Russia began actively seeking skilled craftsmen to aid in the nation's development. Hans Schlitt, Ivan's agent, was tasked with recruiting German craftsmen for this purpose. However, the effort faced significant setbacks when all the craftsmen were arrested in Lübeck, a consequence of interventions by Poland and Livonia, highlighting the complex challenges of politics that Russia was facing. Moreover, the German merchant communities disregarded Ivan's efforts to establish a new port on the river Narva in 1550, preferring instead to trade through ports controlled by Livonia, which also further isolated Russia from sea trade. Well, despite these challenges, Ivan successfully established important international connections, notably with the Kingdom of England. This relationship began to take shape around 1551, with the formation of the Muscovy Company by notable figures such as Richard Chancellor, Sebastian Cabot, and Hugh Willoughby, along with several London merchants. The company was granted significant privileges, including exemption from customary trading tariffs, which facilitated English access to the Russian market through the port of Arkhangelsk and the White Sea, open to them with Ivan's permission. The Tsar's relationship with England was further characterized by his correspondence with Queen Elizabeth I. These communications initially centered around commerce, but Ivan's interests also included potential military alliances. He even proposed marriage to Elizabeth, and later sought political asylum in England should his power be threatened at home, a request to which Elizabeth pragmatically responded that he would be welcome provided he could support himself during his stay. She knocked him back on the marriage proposal, though, so better luck next time. Well, Ivan also reached out to Orthodox Christian leaders abroad, demonstrating his engagement in international religious affairs. In 1558, he responded to a request from Patriarch Joachim of Alexandria for aid to the St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai, which was under threat from the Turks. Although the initial envoy, Archdeacon Gennady, died en route in Constantinople, the mission continued under the leadership of the Smolensk merchant Vasily Pozniakov. This delegation not only delivered a fur coat and an icon from Ivan, but also left detailed accounts about their travels through Alexandria, Cairo, and the Sinai. Another significant aspect of Ivan's international policy was his cooperation with the Free Cossacks, who were instrumental in his military campaigns against the Tatars. This collaboration began around 1549, when Ivan commanded the Don Cossacks to launch attacks on Crimea. The alliance with the Cossacks, facilitated through the Posolsky Prikaz, or the Foreign Affairs Department, involved Moscow providing financial and military support, while respecting the autonomy of the Cossacks, thereby strengthening Russia's military capabilities on its southern frontier. Now, during Ivan's childhood, if we can wind it back a little bit, the northeastern regions of Russia faced frequent raids from the Kazan Khanate. In response to these incursions, a strategic defensive and offensive strategy was employed against the Tatars. In 1540, the Crimean Khan, allied with Safa Girai of Kazan, launched an invasion into Russian territory. The Russian defense, aided by the Kasim Tatars, managed to halt the advance near Murom, forcing Safa Girai to retreat. Girai's failed invasion weakened his authority in Kazan, and a faction favorable to Russia led by Shagali gained significant support. By 1545, Ivan actively supported this pro-Russian group, staging a military show of force along the river Volga. The Russians continued to solidify their position in the region by negotiating neutrality with the Nogai horde in 1551, and receiving submissions from local tribes such as the Arbegs and Udmurts. The same year, the strategic fort of Sviazk was constructed from prefabricated wooden parts transported down the Volga from Uglik. This fort served as a crucial military base in the subsequent campaign against Kazan in 1552. Under the leadership of Prince Alexander Gorbaty-Shuisky, the Russian forces employed battering rams, siege towers, tunneling, and a significant artillery contingent of 150 cannons. They managed to cut off the city's water supply and breach its walls, leading to the fall of Kazan on the 2nd of October in 1552. The city was sacked thoroughly, and its defenses were destroyed. The victory was commemorated by Ivan with the construction of several churches, including the iconic St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow, noted for its oriental architectural features. The capture of Kazan marked the beginning of further conflicts, known as the Cheremis Wars with local populations along the Middle Volga, which were quelled only after harsh military campaigns. By 1557, the First Cheremis War concluded, and the Bashkirs acknowledged Ivan's rule. Subsequent campaigns in 1554 and 56 led to the conquest of the Astrakhan Khanate, strategically located at the mouth of the Volga, securing Russian control over the entire river and access to new territories and trade markets. The newly built fortress in Astrakhan in 1558 by Ivan Virodkov replaced the former Tatar capital, solidifying Russian influence in the region even more. In 1568, under the guidance of Sokollu Mehmed Pasha, the Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire, and the effective administrator under Sultan Selim II, the Ottoman Empire began to engage more directly with what would become a significant northern adversary, that being, of course, the Russians. This engagement marked the onset of a tumultuous period in the history between the two empires. One of the ambitious projects envisioned by the Ottomans was to connect the Volga and Don rivers by a canal, enhancing their strategic and economic control of the region. By the summer of 1569, the Ottomans dispatched a formidable military force to the region, comprising 1,500 janissaries, 2,000 sipahis, and several thousand azabs and akinsis, under the command of Qasim Pasha. Their objectives were twofold: to lay siege to the recently conquered Russian city of Astrakhan, and to initiate the construction of the proposed canal linking the Volga and the Don. Concurrently, an Ottoman fleet was deployed to besiege Azov, aiming to cut off Russian access to the south. Despite these aggressive maneuvers, by early 1570, diplomatic efforts took a turn towards reconciliation. Ivan sent ambassadors to Constantinople to negotiate a treaty that aimed to restore amicable relations between the Tsar of Russia and the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. The envoys were instructed to assure Sultan Selim that Tsar Ivan IV was not antagonistic towards Islam, highlighting that his service included prominent Muslim leaders such as Sayin Bulat, who ruled the Khanate of Kasimov. Additionally, they named other Muslim princes under Russian dominion like Prince Kaibula in Yuriev, Ebak in Suroshk, and various Nogai princes in Romanov, demonstrating a multicultural and multi-faith governmental approach under Ivan's rule. These diplomatic efforts successfully mitigated the tensions for a while, laying the groundwork for a temporary peace between the two empires. In 1558, Ivan initiated the Livonian War, aiming to secure access to the Baltic Sea and its lucrative trade routes. This ambitious military endeavor entangled Russia in prolonged conflict, spanning 24 years against major regional powers, including the Kingdom of Sweden, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and the Teutonic Knights of Livonia. The war strained Russia's economy severely, and the Oprichnina, Ivan's domestic policy of direct rule through agents loyal only to him, caused the significant disruption within the government. Now, the region was further transformed with the Union of Lublin in 1569, which united Lithuania and Poland into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. This new entity found a dynamic leader in Stefan Batory, who was also supported by the Ottoman Empire, a southern adversary of Russia. This alignment squeezed Russia between two significant powers at the time. Now, by 1579, Ivan was in a very precarious position, having rejected all of the peace offers from his adversaries. The ongoing war led to a refugee crisis and was accompanied by severe drought. Epidemics further devastated the population amid these crises. Stefan Batory seized the opportunity to launch military campaigns against Muscovy from 1579 to 81, aiming to sever the Kingdom of Livonia from Russian control. His first offensive in 1579 successfully recaptured Polotsk with a force of 22,000 troops. In 1580, he captured Velikie Luki with 29,000 soldiers and initiated the siege of Pskov in 1581 with a formidable army of around 100,000. Concurrently, Sweden regained control of Navra in Estonia, in 1581. Denmark, unlike Sweden and Poland, found it challenging to sustain its military efforts against Muscovy, and reached an agreement in 1580 with John III of Sweden, transferring its Livonian titles to him. It wasn't until 1582 that Muscovy acknowledged the Polish-Lithuanian dominance over Livonia. Following the death of Magnus von Livland, Ivan's former ally and the brother of Frederick II of Denmark, in 1583, Poland moved to invade his territories in the Duchy of Courland. Subsequently, Frederick II opted to sell his rights of inheritance, marking Denmark's exit from Livonia by 1585, except for the island of Saaremaa. During the later years of Ivan's reign, the southern borders of Muscovy faced frequent disturbances from the Crimean Tatars, who often raided to capture slaves. In 1571, under Khan Devlet I Girai of Crimea, a formidable combined force of 40,000 Crimean Tatars and Turkish soldiers launched a major raid deep into Russian territory. Due to the ongoing Livonian War, Moscow's defenses were severely weakened, with only about 6,000 troops available. Insufficient, of course, to repel the invaders. Devlet Girai, of course, exploited this vulnerability, ravaging the Moscow region, leading to widespread destruction and the devastating Fire of Moscow, which historians estimate killed between 10 and 80,000 people. In an effort to secure peace and curb further invasions, Ivan was compelled to cede claims on Astrakhan to the Crimean Khanate, though this was more of a diplomatic gesture than a genuine territorial concession, and it was never actualized. Frustrated and seeking retribution, Ivan initiated military preparations between 1571 and 72, fortifying the region between the Oka River with the innovative Zasenchnia Cherta defense line. In 1572, Devlet Girai embarked on another large-scale raid towards Moscow, bolstered by Turkish janissaries with firearms and cannons. While despite being outnumbered, the Russian forces, led by Prince Mikhail Vorotinsky, were well prepared for and battle-hardened. The Russian troops, now unified and no longer divided between Oprichnina and Zemstina forces as in the previous year, managed to put up a more cohesive defense. On the 27th of July, as the Crimean horde breached the Oka River defenses and advanced towards Moscow, they were harassed from behind by Prince Khvorostinin's regiment. With the Tatars just 30 kilometers away from Moscow, a decisive engagement unfolded near the village of Molody. After several days of intense combat, on August the 2nd, Vorotinsky executed a flanking maneuver, while Khvorostinin led a sortie, collectively crushing the Tatar forces in a single victory. The battle effectively ended the Tatar threat to central Russia, but despite his military success, Vorotinsky's fate was grim. In the following year, Ivan, who had remained distant in Novgorod during the battle, controversially had Mikhail Vorotinsky killed, reflecting the Tsar's brutal and increasingly paranoid leadership style. The expansion into Serbia under Ivan the Terrible marked a significant chapter in Russian history, characterized by initial exploration and the beginning of colonization. After the conquest of Kazan in 1552, Ivan's attention turned further eastward. In 1555, the Serbian Khan Yadigar, along with the Nogai horde under Khan Ismail, declared their allegiance to Ivan, hoping for his support against their adversaries. However, when Yadigar failed to deliver the promised tribute, Ivan refused to assist him, leading to Yadigar's downfall and assassination by Khan Kuchum in 1563. Kuchum then refused to pay tribute to Moscow, marking a shift in the region's allegiance and control. Recognizing the strategic and economic potential of Siberia, Ivan granted the Astrakhan family, a prominent group of merchants, the rights in 1558 to colonize the fertile lands along the Kama River, and later in 1574 expanses beyond the Ural Mountains along the Tura and Tobol rivers. The Stroganovs were also permitted to establish fortifications along the Ob and Irtysh rivers to protect their new territories. To secure their holdings against the rising threat of Khan Kuchum and to assert Russian interest in Siberia, the Stroganovs hired Yermak Timofeyevich, a Cossack leader, around 1577. Yermak embarked on an ambitious campaign in 1580 with a band of 540 Cossacks to conquer Siberia, which was under the dominion of Kuchum at the time. He strategically coerced and convinced various Siberian tribes through a mix of better allegiance terms of force to shift their loyalties from Kuchum to Moscow. Yermak's initial successes, including the pivotal victory at the Battle of Chuvash Cape, were significant, yet he soon found himself in need of reinforcements. His plea for support resulted in a formal acknowledgement from Ivan, although the promised military aid ended disastrously, with the reinforcements perishing from starvation. Thus, the conquest of Yermak was short-lived, as he met his end in a bloody battle, and his forces, demoralized and depleted, retreated from Siberia. But it wasn't until after Ivan's death in 1586 that Russian forces, recognizing the strategic importance of the region, returned and established a lasting presence in Siberia, founding the city of Tyumen. This marked the beginning of Russia's vast expansion across the Siberian region. Now, a little bit more about Ivan's religious stance. You see, he was a ruler that was deeply influenced by his understanding of Christian orthodoxy, though his interpretations were uniquely and brutally personal. For example, he believed fervently in the divine right of kings, of course, viewing himself as a sovereign with the God-given authority to wield unrestricted power, a belief that was reflected in his harsh governance and the extreme punitive measures he employed, which included drowning, roasting, and torturing people with boiling or freezing water. These actions were justified in his eyes as divine punishments, akin to the torments of hell, aligning himself with the archangel Michael, whom he saw as a symbol of righteous retribution. These religious convictions also led him to boldly interfere in church affairs, despite the typical sacrosanct nature of such positions within Orthodox Christianity. He notoriously ousted and eventually ordered the murder of Metropolitan Philip and deposed the Archbishop of Novgorod, Pimen, amongst other violent acts against church figures during the massacre of Novgorod, where many monks were dragged out and tortured to death. While in his personal life, his religious deviations were equally as stark. Contrary to the Church's strict prohibition against multiple marriages, Ivan had 7 wives, and even contemplated an 8th marriage to Mary Hastings, a distant relative of Queen Elizabeth of England, while his 7th wife was still alive. See, somebody had to beat Henry VIII's record. Well, his rule also showed a pragmatic side in religious toleration when it suited political ends. Funny how that works, isn't it? In the newly conquered khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan, Ivan displayed a degree of tolerance towards Islam, which was a strategic choice aimed at avoiding conflict with the Ottoman Empire, which might have intervened on behalf of the Muslim populations in these regions. However, like with everybody, his tolerance had limits, particularly evidenced by his treatment of Jews. Following the capture of Polotsk, he ordered that all Jews who refused conversion should be drowned, a decree that underscores his deep-seated hatred towards them, despite the economic implications of such actions. Well, he fundamentally transformed the structure of the Russian government, setting the stage for the autocratic Tsarist rule that would define the nation for centuries. His establishment of that oprichnina, a state within a state answerably only to the Tsar himself, significantly diminished the traditional power and privileges of the boyar class. This move towards centralization of power under the Tsar laid the groundwork for the autocracy that would characterize governance. He also reformed the administrative system, blending locally and centrally appointed officials in a way that was both durable and adaptable, providing a framework that would endure with modifications well into the future. He strategically bypassed the older systems that ranked boyar families according to their seniority, and instead filled administrative positions with his own supporters from the minor gentry. This not only secured his power, but began to shift the political culture of Russia towards a more merit-based system. Now, as far as his military expeditions, while they were, particularly against Poland, not successful in terms of territorial gains, they inadvertently broadened Russia's interactions with other European states and laid the groundwork for expanded trade, political and cultural exchanges that Peter the Great would later capitalize on in his efforts to westernize Russia. However, his domestic policies, especially his economic management, were less successful. Inheriting a government already burdened with debt, Ivan implemented a series of heavy taxes to fund his military campaigns. These were unpopular and exacerbated economic difficulties at home. His incessant wars depleted the nation's resources and manpower, pushing the economy to the brink of collapse. The resultant economic instability, contributed to the decline of the Rurik dynasty after his death, leading to the period of civil strife known as the Time of Troubles. His legacy, therefore, is somewhat of a mixed one, marked by significant political and administrative reorganization, but also by economic ruin and instability that cast a shadow over Russia for quite a long time after his death. And speaking of his death, well, on March 28, 1584, while playing chess with one Bogdan Belsky, he suddenly had a stroke. That's right, and passed away. His death left the throne to his less capable middle son, Fyodor. Fyodor, who lacked strong leadership qualities and died without heirs in 1598, marked the onset of more turbulent times. Cold, cold days in a cold, cold country. Well, thank you very much for listening. Ivan the Terrible, Certainly, I can think of more terrible people than him. Well, I'd like to thank my top-tier patrons, Tim, Wendy, Britt, Charles, Jeffrey, JC, and Stark Factory. Hope you're all doing well out there, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. But for now, I will say good night, and I will see you tomorrow.